Let's maul in the Central Committee. Let's cringe in the Central Committee. Let's bog in the Central Committee right now.
All right. Well, if you guys don't mind, would you mind giving your like elevator pitch, who you guys are,
Sure.
how it goes, like where people can find you, and what your projects are all about?
Pascal, you want to go?
Sure. Jason is the host, and I am the co-host of This Is Revolution podcast. You can find us live streaming on YouTube on Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Thursday nights 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and noon on Saturdays Eastern Standard Time. We're basically a podcast that covers politics, current affairs, and pop culture from a left perspective without really interjecting any kind of sectarian notions of the left. We do kind of more evergreen content in that we're not really about kind of navel gazing the news of the day every day, what's going on in DC, but giving more kind of political education and overall, subjects of interest to our audience to really introduce them to a left perspective and understanding of, political phenomenon, cultural phenomenon, and pop culture phenomenon as well.
I think that covers it.
All right. So that's great. We could get right into it because the reason why I wanted to bring you guys on is I did see you on the Majority Report kind of discussing one of the thornier things to discuss in democratic politics, which is kind of the institutions around like the Democratic Party, especially in our cities. And I was wondering if you guys could explain to our, the reason, what kind of brought this topic up for me was the recent race with Nina Turner out in Cleveland. Now, I've been a longtime campaign worker, and I went out there and I kind of experienced firsthand, like, oh, this campaign is kind of doesn't have its shit together. But
were you canvassing, or were
yes,
you just out
I went out there to canvass. I've knocked 20,000 doors at least in the past couple of years. So when I go out there, I experienced firsthand how they didn't have their stuff together. And I wanted to ask you guys about kind of the intervention that happened at a higher level. And I thought you might be able to give us good insights. What do you think about like the Congressional Black Caucus deciding to endorse Shontel Brown? And what does that tell us about like the institutions of the Democratic Party, especially for, Black people and in inner cities?
Jason, if you want to interject first, or you want to defer to me.
I mean, it's funny. We just did a show about this with, we've done this
several.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an ongoing theme, but we've been actually trying to talk about this a little more centrally. We've been calling this series The Crisis in Black Politics. And we just did the second episode on it with Brianna Joy Gray on last Tuesday or Thursday. I don't remember the day. It was last week. You can find it on YouTube or here on Twitch. I mean, where do you want to start when it comes to
I mean, I think that we have certain themes that we have on our show. One of them is what we call the 50-year counter-revolution, which is basically the way in which American politics post-civil rights era after the death of Martin Luther King Jr. and the rise of Nixon basically becomes a counter-revolution against the new left in the 60s with a turn to neoliberalism. Another one of our main themes is basically that Black politics is a politics of containment. And what we mean by that is that basically that Black politics is a system where you have ventriloquism by the Black political class, which are your elected officials, Congressional Black Caucus, civil rights establishment, also the cultural apparatus, your Black churches, membership organizations like fraternities and sororities, Freemason halls, lodges, Jack and Jill, so on and so forth, that basically curate the Black vote in exchange for patronage from the corporate acolytes of the Democratic Party. So that, for example, using South Carolina and Jim Clyburn, when the South Carolina primary is about to happen, Clyburn has the phone number of all the major pastors in the Black churches, the presidents of the graduate and alumni chapters of the Black fraternities and sororities. That in that you have your Black teachers, principals, administrators of all your Black high schools, historic Black colleges and universities, all of the presidents of those schools who get patronage from Clyburn in constituent services. So he's able to leverage those constituent services patronage, what we pejoratively call fatback and biscuits, that he gets from the Democratic Party's corporate acolytes to maintain a fealty to the kind of ideological superstructure he, as a Black political class member, generates in terms of who to vote for. This doesn't only happen in South Carolina. This is basically how Black politics works nationally.
Yes.
And this is why when we say Black politics is a politics of containment, the democratic aspirations of Black voters in terms of what they want is subsidiary or secondary to the overall machinations of the Black political class, who basically work at the behest of the ruling class within the Democratic Party or bipartisanly, depending on the agenda, for their own venal goals and interests, and not really. And this is why Black politics, as Adolph Reed says, is a class politics. And the class it represents are university-trained, pedigreed Black folk who do not represent the majority of Black folk who are working class and poor.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things you really touched on that I want to dive deeper into and explain for the audience. So from my perspective, I first encountered this machine when I was working for a Black progressive running for Congress by the name of Greg Edwards here in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a Justice Democrat, and in
2016 or
it was 2018.
Okay,
2018, and he had a tremendous amount of support. He was the pastor of a Liberation Theology church here in Allentown, and really progressive, worked in the community, had community support, especially people, had a cross-racial coalition. And we started to encounter serious headwinds from Congressional Black Caucus people, but, the institutional Democratic Party, people could go look this race up because it ended up being one of the biggest intra-party fights between him and a white woman, Susan Wild, who was kind of a corporate lawyer who ran as a progressive, ran to the left, tried to kind of bear hug him on policies like Medicare for all and stuff like that.
He was running to the left of him, you said?
No, she tried to bear hug him, get close to him, but still, still making the signals to the Democratic Party. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you guys about is how did this form as a method? You mentioned the New Left and kind of pushing back. So how did this actually form, and how is it enforced politically, and how do these people get and maintain power?
It's a really fascinating question. I think that we answered that when we talk about the Gary, Indiana convention. Basically, what basically happened is that after the Civil Rights Movement in the beginning of the 70s, between 1968 and 1972, there were a series of Black political conventions, literally where you had movement organizers from SNCC, Black Panther Party, the traditional civil rights organizations, and the newly burgeoning Black elected officials post-voting rights who were getting into power. A few Black
keep
mayors.
in mind, you have Black mayors around this time. You're starting to, this is the first time you're starting to get Black mayors in the late 60s and early 70s in majority Black cities, right? So we talking Atlanta gets their first Black mayor around the same time. Right before this happens, you get Newark, New Jersey gets their first Black mayor around this time. That's actually brought into power by these people that Pascal is talking about. When did Tom Bradley come into power? Around that same time, Pascal?
Bradley's later, isn't he? Late 70s, early 80s?
Late 70s. Okay. But still.
So what happens is that a lot of these politicians are people who either were in civil rights movement organizations or were adjacent, or they were in administrative functionals of Great Society programs that gave them skills and the wherewithal to negotiate their way into political positionality. What happened in the last of these conventions in 1972, which is the Gary, Indiana convention, there was an attempt by the kind of Black radical contingency that came out of the Black Power movement to try to push for a more direct policy that addressed the needs of working class Black people. There were debates about issues about Israel. There were a variety of different issues that they wanted to push. But because of the skill and the ability of the Black political class that was really burgeoning at that time, which, don't forget, the Congressional Black Caucus is founded the year before Gary Convention, in 71. So they had already kind of started to feel their oats in political office. they basically usurped the agenda of the Garrett Convention in 1972 and put themselves in a position to neutralize the radical aspirations of the movement organizer types that came out of Black Power, and basically turned Black politics into an ethnic patronage politics. Except the difference between the ethnic patronage politics you get in Black politics in the early 70s and what you had with the Irish and the Italians or the Jews in the 30s and 40s and 50s, particularly the 40s and 50s, is that American capitalism was on the upswing post-World War II. So there was more capital and resources and goods and services to be able to actually dole out. So you could have like a daily regime in Chicago based on the Irish. You could have, LaGuardia, or you could have a few other white ethnic patronage coalitions.
To be as brief as possible, these guys come into power as deindustrialization is really setting in, right, and capital is starting to move overseas. So you're talking about these cats coming into power in cities that a lot of times are majority Black, but they're also extremely poor. So they walk in the door almost with austerity politics.
So they literally become the managers of austerity and implement politics because of the economic realities that they're in that work to the disservice of their Black constituents and literally use their racial kinship, I'm Black and I'm proud, as a ideological leverage to keep their affinity, because in the minds of these Black folk just coming out of the civil rights movement, they're like, we got to support the Black man because the white man, God knows what he's going to do to us. And they play on those emotional sympathies to maintain their hold over Black politics.
Yeah. So one of the dynamics, getting back to like concrete political reality is, and something that I want your guys' thoughts on, which is the civil rights districts. Basically, the Civil Rights Act mandated that there be majority minority districts, and so this gave that created this method of drawing districts politically in order to ensure that there were districts where Black or brown people were in the majority there, to quote, ensure their political participation. And actually, from my point of view, and I think the evidence is pretty clear, what happened was that gave the right wing, especially, the ability to gerrymander, because in America, politically, white people, there are, the Republican Party is a white party. And so when you draw lines by race, you're also drawing them in large parts by party as well. And so that allows you to at gerrymander, there's a method called packing and cracking. Packing is where you put as many of the opposition party into one district as possible. And so we have this legacy where you have these Congressional Black Caucus members who are in these civil rights districts that are packed for the Democrats. And it allows the Republican Party to basically seize power nationwide. And you have these very few isolated Congressional Black Caucus members. And then when you look at them politically, this is what happened and this is exactly what's happening in the Ohio 11th with Nina Turner, in my view, is you have a district that is, D plus 40, right? Safe Democratic seat. And then they use GOP money and corporate money to pick the most conservative Democrat they can. And people like Shontel Brown and people, like Jim Clyburn and many others, they go in these districts that are far, safe Democrat. And you have basically someone who's out there. And this is a topic I was wondering if you guys would touch on, who's out there pushing right wing policies. One of them, for example, just to start the conversation off, is much of the Congressional Black Caucus right now is opposed to the inheritance tax. They would like to see the inheritance tax repealed. What do you think that says about the success of this? And do you think that political power of Black and brown people might actually be enhanced if we don't have districts like this?
Well, that's a very sticky question, right? Because
that's what I'm asking you guys.
It's a difficult situation because if you remove those kind of districts, there's a certain kind of possibility that the Black voter constituencies could have their voting power absorbed by the larger
what you're dealing with in Georgia, right?
Yeah, exactly. Larger white surrounding suburbs. So I that's something I am not a specialist in terms of election mapping. Mm-hmm. So I would have to really consult someone who was more aware in terms of how that would work. That's not my area of expertise. I'm generally more of a student of the Black political history and its qualitative effect in terms of how these actors work relative to their power. But what I will say this in terms of the Congressional Black Caucus supporting abolishing the estate tax is not surprising to me. I mean, I spent 10 years writing for Black Agenda Report, and I don't know if you're familiar with our publication, one of our major jobs was to illustrate how the Congressional Black Caucus fundamentally works as an agent against the interests of its Black constituents all the time. They were wrong on net neutrality. They came on the wrong side of that. They're almost consistently wrong on the wrong side of the Israeli-Palestine issue. I wrote an article, as a matter of fact, you should pull it up if you can, called, thanks to the Congressional Black Caucus, Remy from House of Cards is real. Now, I don't know if you remember the TV show House of Cards. Remy was this kind of like consultant kind of guy who used to be a staffer in the House for the protagonist in the show. I forgot his name was Frank something, and he becomes like a consultant for a lobbying firm.
Right.
Well, what people don't know is that the Congressional Black Caucus had its own staffers for a while, and that in the 80s they created an organization called, I think, the Washington Government Relations Group. Jason, if you can find that article, I think it's in All Hip Hop. It's in Black Agenda Report too. But just Google my name, Remy House of Cards Congressional Black Caucus. And what's fascinating, right, is that these were Black former staffers of the Congressional Black Caucus who used their relationship with the Congressional Black Caucus to create a lobbyist organization of Black lobbyists who would lease out their services to the most corporate friendly, like completely like pure Wall Street, right wing,
hyper right wing,
blood money companies. And what the article talks about is that when it came to the issue of Dodd-Frank, and this is during the Obama administration, you had the Congressional Black Caucus, several members, not all of them, who were lobbying to gut Dodd-Frank because these staffers who had been working for CBC members were now working for lobbyist firms that represented big banks.
Yeah. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. And you could see it with Chantel Brown, right? Which and Nina Turner, which is who rescued Chantel Brown. It was corporate money, third way. I know there was a report we covered on this show about in The Intercept where it was literally GOP donors. One of Trump's biggest donors gave $1 million to Chantel Brown.
Isn't that how you neutralize a party in representative democracy? If I want to neutralize the right wing, wouldn't I fund the Libertarian Party?
Well, I mean, I think that from a left perspective, right? Like we don't really have that ability, right? So they're making a decision that's centralized from capital, so they can deploy resources, right? Whereas on the left, someone like Nina Turner, she's getting her money $25 at a time, and it's going to be very difficult for us to tell people go donate to this random libertarian guy, right?
But Nina Turner is also part of the political establishment.
Of course,
not saying that as a bad thing.
Part of the Black political class.
Yeah, she's just part of the Black political class. So it says to me a lot about the Democratic Party and where they really stand when it comes to pushing back against this new post Bernie Sanders upsurge of a more left flank of the Democratic Party.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so would you talk? Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's not effective. I think it's very effective, and they showed that. And the other element was this the small part of the suburbs they had linking, Cleveland and Akron goes through this Jewish community, right? And it was white, wealthy Jewish people who traditionally vote for, Democrats in general elections, 60-40 or something. But in this election, AIPAC or the Democratic Majority for Israel, they spent big bucks coming in. And one of Chantel Brown's victory speeches was on thanking her Jewish brothers and sisters. And she had a long policy program statement she put out, white paper, that I, honest to God, thought I was reading Donald Trump's Israel policy.
Right. Absolutely.
So what do you guys make of that? And both as foreign actors playing and what it says about Black politics in general.
Well, what it says about the Black political class in general, barring Nina Turner because she's kind of in this Sanders coterie, right?
Right.
Is that they're up for sale. And they've been up for sale for 50 years. This is not for people who are real students of Black politics, who read particularly Black left political scientists like Adolph Reed, Cedric Johnson, Willie Leggett, who read Black Agenda Report, who read the critique of Black politics from the left. This surprises no one.
Right.
Because what happens is that Black politics at the birth of this Black political class in the post-civil rights era literally becomes a class politics that embraces a form of kind of Black capitalism, bootstrapism, respectability politics that helps these politicians leverage their relationship with the power elite and financial institutions and the corporate institutions that basically have always worked to the disadvantage of working class people who are disproportionately Black and brown, in order to maintain their relationship with those powers to the detriment of their constituency. Jim Clyburn, receives more money from Big Pharma than I think any other congressman in the House. It's not accidental that he's trying to put the kibosh on candidates and campaigns that support Medicare for all. It's quite logical. So the what I'm trying to convey to you is that if you read a piece I wrote for Black Agenda Report called "The Fallacy of Racial Kinship Politics," one of the sad, naive assumptions of many members of the Black electoral constituency is that race or Blackness creates a kind of racial kinship with your elected office, and because he's Black, he's going to have the interests of the community at heart. And what people fail to realize, unfortunately, particularly in the age of this kind of neoliberal identity politics, is that race is not that racial kinship is a tool that elected official uses to buttress his support in that constituency and betray them at the behest of the corporate acolytes that fill his coffers and basically do their bidding, because he can always say, who they going to support? The white Republican? Come on, man. These brothers know me. They see me at the Masonic Hall or the fraternity or the step show or at the Jack and Jill cotillion that we have every year. I send money to the historically Black colleges. They're not going to do me wrong. And because they get patronage, the fatback and biscuits from those same corporate acolytes, they keep their supporters and their players in play. And we're not talking about mostly working class and poor Black people. They're basically dealing with college-educated, university pedigreed Black folk who are the upper echelon of the Black political class, who control the ideological superstructure of the Black community, because they are the teachers, they are the Boy Scout leaders, they are the church elders, they are the HBCU administrators, they are in these membership organizations, fraternities, sororities, which I know well. I'm a member of one, have been in one for almost 35 years. I'm not talking about something from out of experience. I know how these institutions work because I was raised in one of the premier vehicles. There's almost every member of the Congressional Black Caucus, including Kamala Harris, is a member of a Black fraternity. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. Jim Clyburn is a member of Omega Psi Phi. Hakeem Jeffries is a member of Kappa Alpha Psi.
Hakeem.
All of these organizations create the training ground upon which the Black political class gets its education in how parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Orders, networking, that they rise up in the political echelons of Black communities to become politicians that work at the behest of the power elite and the ruling class to the detriment of the majority of Black folk.
Yeah, and I think that's, unfortunately very true. So just to ask you a question about the mechanics of it. One of the things that I ran into when I was more involved in Democratic Party politics as a leftist insurgent was the way at which Democratic Party politicians actually deploy resources in the community to swing votes, right? It's one thing to say, vote for me because I'm Black, but if they, for example, if Cori Bush versus Clay, right, in St. Louis, she's primarying him. So it's a Black woman against a Black man. You can't just say, vote for me, I'm the Black candidate.
Establishment Black family. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so now, how do they deploy those resources? And I'll give you an anecdote that I've heard. I was not involved in, all criminal investigators, which is the idea of how the corruption would work. In Philadelphia, for example, they will have what's known as paid canvases, but they are paid in name only. and you will say, oh, here, I would like to hire you as a paid canvassing consultant, and why don't you hire 10 people to pay them $100 or $200 to do a day of paid canvasses, and you hand them an envelope with money, and it's $2,000 or something, or $4,000, and you say, hey, pastor of this church, well, do you know anybody who would be good for this paid canvassing opportunity? And then suddenly that person is now a prominent member of the community. They go around, maybe even hand out some of that money to people, but their allegiance is literally bought. And
yeah, well, this is the thing, though. I mean, you're talking about things that are obviously illicit. What I'm saying is that it doesn't even have to be illicit. It can be legitimately done. Listen,
right.
You can have Congressional Black Caucus member X in Pennsylvania.
Well, let's use hold on, Pascal. Let's use a real example. Let's use a real world example. I don't know how old you are, Mike. I don't know if you remember.
37, old.
We're both older than you by quite a bit.
Oh shit! Sorry.
So Marion Barry.
Oh yeah.
Marion Barry can't get reelected, getting caught smoking crack. And keep in mind, he had been the mayor there for years. He comes out of the civil rights movement. The reason why people fought so hard for him, and also keep this one thing in mind. After he won again, he ran again for a city council seat like 15 years later.
Yeah.
And won.
Yep.
Because he actually had real-time results for people. So it's not just here's an envelope of money and it's all dirty dealings. Because what happens is people automatically assume that everything has to be very, very illegal for any of this shit to happen. Like Jim Clyburn doesn't have any real results for real people. Something has to get done in real time for people to keep voting for him. And the same can be said for someone like Marion Barry. Marion Barry put people to work when there was no work in late 70s, very economically depressed Washington, D.C. Now, was he part of gentrification projects that got those Negroes pushed out of town later on? Yup. But a lot of people got jobs and they still fight real hard for him.
Yeah.
What these politicians are able to do is that basically, because they're privy to any kind of set-asides, programs, allotments, or policies that either private sector individuals or public sector individuals who want to have contracts or get ranks in bidding hierarchy within their constituencies, because they get this information, and they have nonprofits or foundations that are funneled with money by their corporate backers, they're able to do constituent services that are not illegal, that help perpetuate maintaining a fidelity to their political project. For example, with historically Black colleges and universities, Jim Clyburn is going to make sure that XYZ pharmaceutical company is handing out tens of thousands of dollars in scholarship monies at his golf tournament, allegedly, every year, to make sure that he can tell South Carolina State that, I looked out for you guys this year. We have 50 of our students are going to medical school, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And he has that kind of constituent relationship with several other institutions in that community because he leverages that fat back and biscuits or those resources, that money that he has to actually provide them with goods and services. Now, I'm not saying you that the phenomenon you're talking about doesn't exist as well. Of course it exists. That kind of, pay as you play kind of graft,
graft, yeah.
Stuff. But what I'm trying to tell you is that it doesn't have to be even that extreme to have these mechanisms work. It's just basically it's an ethnic patronage machine where the return on investment are basically small constituent services allotments that come from the corporate acolytes of these elected officials for voter fidelity when it comes to major election issues.
Yeah. Obviously, I think it's important to talk about like the legitimate form as well as the illegitimate form because they do both. And I think one of the things I would like to ask you guys about is the left. Like, how do we deploy against this, right? Because if we're interested in electoral politics, and there have been people that have had success recently in beating some of these machines. We mentioned Cori Bush. You have Jamal Bowman beating Elliot Engel in New York. We have seen some people that are advocating for a different type of politics win in some of these districts. How does the left counter, these long-term institutional, black politicians, and how do they, activate the, working class that has been mostly politically demobilized and turned apathetic?
Well, I'll say something real. Yeah. We had a woman on the show about a month or so ago that was running a special election because as Kamala Harris got into the vice presidency, a lot of people moved up in the state government. So there's a state assembly seat that's open. There's a special election for it. And she is running as a Democrat, but she's running to the left of the incumbent. Mm-hmm. The incumbent is the wife of our now state attorney general, Rob Bonta. So now you're talking about a political family that's deeply entrenched with the real estate lobby.
Of course.
A place like California that's got a horrible housing problem and a gentrification problem. And you have another person in state government that is in bed with this lobby. And one thing Pascal always brings up on the show, and it's been kind of funny asking white leftists, and we don't do it in a way that's antagonizing. It's really a strategic question is, but Pascal always goes, why don't you go into black churches? And the first time you say that, they hit you with the beatbox. Pff, what? Pff, 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 what? I don't black. It's such a foreign space.
Not for me. I already. that's why I started off the conversation with Greg Edwards, who has that Liberation Theology Church and.
But that's very different than
traditional.
The traditional church that I grew up in.
Right.
I wouldn't say my grandfather was that far off. I actually grew up in. My grandfather was a bishop of several churches, but it definitely wasn't the same as James Cone, for example. So this young lady actually is all in black spaces. I mean, I live in Oakland, California. It's much like Philadelphia. Looks exactly. I was in Philly not too long ago. I was like, God damn, this looks like where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
And she's of Indian ethnicity, and she is walking in all these multiracial spaces, black churches, Latin churches. She's organizing against an incumbent that's got millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it's working. She won her primary, and now it's going up to, we have a special election next month. So
I think the answer to your question also in line with what Jason is saying, which is something that the contemporary manifestation of the left has not done, is that you got to go and interact with these people in their spaces and organize them around a politics that is rooted in working class policy. And the left, the left is online. We don't have a left. We have leftists. We're mostly online. There's not a lot of organizing in these communities of color where they're trying to mobilize them around politics. Yet we have all these institutions, and these are the same people who will ask, well, I don't understand why the black folk didn't support Bernie. It's like, what kind of outreach, what kind of community outreach did Bernie Sanders have? What kind of resources did he have? Because we know he didn't have the resources to give out the patronage to keep the fidelity of those black constituencies. But at the same time, the left is going to have to find a way to puncture that ideological superstructure that the black political class has over those constituencies and offer up policies that address working class needs and also appeal to the generational rift that's happening as well, because the under 40 black constituents are not falling in line with the old guard because they're realizing that American capitalism isn't working for them. So as a result, they're looking for opportunities. Some unfortunately may go to the right. Larger numbers may be interested in Bernie Sanders. But what I'm saying is that we're kind of in a moment right now that this crisis of black politics needs to be taken up by the left if we're interested in truly having a working class politics and find a way to organize these constituents.
Did you get a video that I sent you, Mike? I sent your producer a video.
Let me see if I got that.
It's literally about what we're talking about. It's like 5 minutes. It's literally 5 minutes.
I think they I hate God, it feels so disorganized today, but they didn't get it to me. You can there is a chat in the Zoom
Oh,
if you want to try to send it to me there,
let me see if I can. Give me 1 second.
and I can grab that.
Because that's our show Tuesday is literally talking about the revolution. It's titled "What is the revolutionary capacity of the Black Church?"
Yeah, and you know, one of the things is like everybody who's a leftist who does real organizing, you know, for example, say DSA. I'm a big proponent of DSA.
We're both DSA.
But the truth is, in most DSA chapters, you're going to be struck that it's a pretty white, college-educated set that typically forms the nucleus of a lot of DSA chapters, right? As opposed, you know, that's not true of all. There's a lot of really great chapters in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to rep Pennsylvania, but it's still overwhelmingly in a lot of spaces a whiter place than you would expect from a left-wing, you know, movement. And penetrating, you know, and getting the message out there is difficult for a lot of people to navigate that reality. I've seen a lot of success, you know, people organizing through a lot of different methods. There's a great group called Make the Road out here in the East, you know, New York, Pennsylvania, organizing around the problems that, you know, undocumented people face. And so we've seen, but we, you know, to get back to the topic, you know, we've seen some success with people like Cori Bush and others.
It took a while for Cori Bush. It wasn't the first time through.
Yeah, and that's something that's you know, also a reality. Like you mentioned the Bernie Sanders and the Clyburn thing. Like Bernie Sanders is not the nominee in large part because of the efforts of Jim Clyburn. Like, and the fact that South Carolina was this wall that held, and it kind of, you know, the thing that people don't recognize is a lot of white Democrats don't want to vote for someone that they perceive signals that they're out of touch with people of color. So like,
this ridiculous kind of virtue signaling is like,
yeah,
oh, the Black constituency knows best.
Exactly.
You'll disenfranchise them by not voting for whoever they support without the realization that the Black electorate is captured by the Black political class.
Well,
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just gonna say. Well, that's kind of the game, right? And the other thing is, like, notice that it's South Carolina that's selected to be representative of Black politics. Which, unless you're stupid, you recognize that Black people in South Carolina are not the same as in Atlanta. They're not the same as in Philadelphia. They're not the same as in Milwaukee. Those are different communities, and they have different views. And if you talk to Black people in Philadelphia, they're going to be more left wing than Black people in South Carolina. South Carolina happens to be one of the most conservative states overall. So when you use them to represent all Black people, first of all, it's just not right. And it's kind of, and it gives these conservative, you know, the conservative Black political class, the patina of like a democratic choice, when in reality it's ground that they've picked, and they've picked it for a very good, you know, important tactical reason.
I think when you look back at the history and you look, especially when the civil rights movement started to shift away, we did a great show with the scholar Preston Smith, and when they started to shift away from social democracy into racial democracy, and people like King didn't really speak too much on being a socialist. He may have hinted at class in a lot of his speeches.
There's a couple quotes.
But I mean, honestly, the King that we remember is stuck in 1960. Was it 3?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the last few lines of a speech is the King that everybody remembers. But of course, he was much more radical than that's the March for Jobs and Freedom, not the March on Washington. That's what it's renamed.
Right.
So a big reason for me even wanting to do this show was to get especially Black people reacquainted with our more radical socialist and communist past. It is the Communist Party that is a big reason why things like the Civil Rights bill is passed, and Pascal can elaborate even more.
Basically, we know about there's a really good book by a woman named, she's a political scientist and a lawyer. Her name is Mary Dudziak, Cold War Civil Rights, and this is not even debated, but one of the main impetus for the Civil Rights Acts being passed in America pivoting to want to end Jim Crow was not only because Southern agriculture was shifting and sharecropper labor was no longer palatable and necessary, is because American Jim Crow segregation was very bad for America's foreign policy image in the global South with the rising popularity of the Soviet Union as a new economic paradigm that would have challenged American capitalism. And if you read the amicus curiae brief to say Brown v. Board of Education, you can see the State Department basically saying like we need to like vote on the side of the NAACP here because this is bad for foreign policy. We can't do this anymore because it's going to be an obstacle to our ability to do business in newly independent Africa, India, and other countries that are going to be considering communism. There's a great video on YouTube of Richard Nixon in the 1960 election. If you type Richard Nixon and civil rights, where Nixon says, "I'm going to talk to you about civil rights. It's something that we must do because it's fair. But also, the world is watching, and we cannot compete with communism."
Right.
He literally is saying this on the video. That we can't if we keep doing this and treating Black people this way, we will not be able to compete with the communists in the global South.
And let's keep in mind with segregation, the South during segregation was one of the poorest parts of this country, if not the poorest part of this country.
I mean, it still is, but.
And political figures that come out of the South. I was watching a great interview with James Cone, an old interview from the Bill Moyers show. But a lot of the future political leaders that come out of the South, Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, a big reason why they can come out of the South is because of segregation ending. And that nasty film of these horrible racists kind of being wiped away with the end of segregation. So that was like an important moment. And we really have to understand that segregation didn't just end because LBJ watched some people get hit with police batons and water hoses. Yeah, and we really have to understand the economic structure that was going on in the South with like, as Pascal says, the mechanization of like sharecropping, which was a massively large industry that had also a ton of white people in it.
Well, yeah, I think you guys raised a really important point, and it's also like the compete with communists was, that's the fundamental problem with American like foreign policy was there was the decolonizations happening around the world, and a new leadership class was arising in those decolonized states, and the United States didn't have any credibility competing for their support when. If those people arrived in Atlanta, they would immediately have to go to the back of the bus, So in order for the United States to compete, it had to do this kind of social democratic turn. It had to give concessions because at the same time, the Soviet Union was actively supporting militarily, financially, rhetorically, the liberation struggles of people all over the world. And the United States needed to do something in order to have any credibility at all. Yeah.
And let's think about the Black political class that also, again, back to what we were saying earlier, that comes up during this era. When you have someone like Maynard Jackson in Atlanta, he comes in, builds that big ass airport. You got Coca-Cola in there. So private industry is creating a pretty large Black middle class. And
right.
That's also where you get all these civil rights guys are going to pasture.
Yeah. And so do you see like, you talked about the generational switch, you mentioned that generational shift earlier, Pascal. Do you see that as kind of like a breaking point, or is it something
I think it is a breaking point? I think that's where fertile territory lies in terms of fracturing the hold the Black political class has over Black voters, but that's not going to be enough, right? I mean, you're going to want to be able to. And you don't want to, how long do you want to have to wait before those young under 40 people are controlling the institutions in those communities? And who's to say they don't become more conservative as they get older? The larger point is that you definitely should reach out to the younger coterie in these communities as well. But you should still, I think the best model is we really need to look at what Cori Bush did to oust Lacey Clay. She basically was able to say, listen, this guy's an absentee congressman. He's never here when we need him. and he basically doesn't fulfill. In the height of the Ferguson rebellions, that also provided a very good mechanism for her to leverage her activism within the kind of Black Lives Matter context against his complete, just like benign neglect. I would call it malignant neglect. So there are fissures that are existing. And I think that one of the things that has to happen as well, which is what we've been trying to do on our podcast and our appearances on other podcasts, is that this new burgeoning left or leftists, whatever you want to call it, the kind of DSA, SOC, they have to become more conversant on how Black politics really works,
right,
how these institutions really work, how these churches, universities, civil rights organizations, membership organizations, fraternities, sororities, how the class hierarchy in Black society and communities help facilitate a politics where you can have congressional Black caucus members who are advocating of gutting of the wealth tax. Okay, because the problem is, in the consciousness of the majority of American societies, everyone who is Black underclass. That's not a reality.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And it, talking about, I'm less skeptical of anybody who ever makes a demographics as destiny argument to me. I don't believe you. I don't think there's suddenly going to be some shift that happens just because of a demographic change. I need to see a structure changing for power to change. And maybe that's a material condition. I'm not trying to be too skeptical to you. I'm just saying the lazy thing of sit back and, boomers will die out and everything will become great. I don't buy it.
No, I don't buy it either.
And the other thing is, like, for example, a great example in the person you mentioned, Hakeem Jeffries, right? He ran against, this is an internal Democratic Party politics stuff, but this is what I read about. He ran against Barbara Lee. Right. We just talked about her today because of the war of Afghanistan ending. She was the only congressperson to vote against it. And Hakeem Jeffries ran against her for the number 4 spot in the Democratic leadership in the House. And he ran against her by doing a whisper campaign saying that Barbara Lee had funded AOC's run against Crowley. Right. He went to reps behind the scenes and said, hey, Barbara Lee gave money to AOC. That's what, if you support her for this leadership position, she's going to be supporting primaries for you. Right. And he's now, he ended up winning by, I think, like 5 votes for that position within the Democratic caucus. And so he is a young man. I think he's Gen X, and he's being positioned as the possible next Speaker of the House.
Correct.
And his entire political work right now is attacking the left. He
is a rabid pit bull against the progressive movement that exists in the Democratic Party.
Correct.
He wants it destroyed.
And he's a perfect example of what we're talking about here, right? A Black dude. Didn't he go to school with Brianna? Is that who she said she went to school with? Did he go to Harvard?
No. He went to NYU. He's my age. He's much older than Brianna.
Who did she go to school with?
Somebody else.
Mondaire Jones.
Mondaire Jones. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Hakeem Jeffries, who I'm very familiar with, went to State University of New York, Binghamton undergrad, went to NYU Law School, went to a major corporate law firm, and has been a corporate pawn all his life, charter school pimp, the whole 9 yard. Typical,
right? Charter school. Oh, that's a huge red flag. Sorry for jumping in on you, but just for my audience, just to explain it, because I think all of us are on a level that maybe some of the audience might not be. But basically, one of the best red flags for me in my political career is, what does this person think about charter schools?
No, it's very important. Let me tell you why this is important. Because one of the first litmus tests for the new burgeoning Black political class that comes about in the post-Bill Clinton era, in terms of whether or not you'll be supported by the neoliberal corporate faction, is if you support charter schools. There's a reason why Obama, Cory Booker, Adrian Fenty, Harold Ford Jr., and Artur Davis were kind of the petri dish of experiments as to who's going to be the Black president first, because they all were rabid supporters of corporate charter schools. They all were into neoliberal privatization. They were all big on Wall Street deregulation. So there becomes Glenn Ford, my now departed editor at Black Agenda Report, wrote a very good article exposing how at a certain point in between the 80s and the 90s, massive corporate capital starts to get poured into Black politics. And what happens is that it's the furthering of a neoliberal agenda that captures Black politics, that is represented by this new burgeoning Black politician who tends to come from elite universities, Ivy League schools, or Ivy League adjacent, and he's supporting all of these really noxious policies that are not to the best interests of Black communities. I mean, Obama's race to the top. I mean, there's like tens and hundreds of thousands of Black and brown teachers lost their jobs because of that Betsy DeVos nonsense. And the point I'm trying to convey is it's very important to find out what these people believe about charter schools, because that's often the time the bellwether as to whether or not they're one of these neoliberal pawn Obama replicated candidates, which is exactly what Hakeem Jeffries is.
Yeah, I often, it's funny because for me, I'm launching a crusade against him. I think that people on the left should be more sophisticated about exactly who the people are that are trying to destroy us. And there's this kind of like naivete that exists within the left, especially the electoral left, and they don't recognize that like these people are out for blood, they're out for power, and we need to start identifying them and attacking them. And Hakeem Jeffries represents a very apt counter to people like, say, Jamal Bowman or Cori Bush, right? From the establishment, finding someone who is, can mouth pieties about left, generically left positions. I think he's even on the Medicare. Is he on the Medicare for All bill? I think he might be a co-sponsor of the Medicare for All bill.
Hakeem Jeffries is being courted right now to possibly replace Nancy Pelosi. There was a whole article, and there was an article in the Atlantic about him, basically trial ballooning him. By
Dovery, right? Who is one of the most anti-left reporters in the Atlantic. So like you can see that this is exactly, we could, if you're aware of things, if you paid attention in the last 5 years as the Bernie Sanders movement grew, these are the people that we're going to be fighting. These are the next generation. And the idea that, Clyburn dies and then suddenly we're all going to, sweep into power, to me is just like not happening.
Guess who's positioning to replace Clyburn when he leaves?
Good question.
I know who. Do you know who?
No, I don't. Go. Please inform me. I'm learning.
Bakari Sellers.
Oh, Bakari. Of course. Yeah, if you don't know, but it's funny because Bakari Sellers was so anti-Bernie, but he actually didn't. He endorsed Nina. He endorsed Nina Turner, which was really interesting.
Well, he denies that he endorsed her. He said, "I didn't endorse her. I just said nice words about her, and I went to visit her. I didn't endorse her." There's an article that comes out. I think I shared it with you yesterday, just in the Jerusalem Post, some very pro-Zionist publication, where he was like, "I support Israel," and Cornel West is an anti-Semite.
Yes.
He did share that. Yeah. He did call Cornel West an anti-Semite. I thought that was.
Well, I mean, this, that's actually something, I mentioned earlier, like
he's a cockroach. I mean, that guy's horrible, man.
Yeah. We agree on a lot. This is great. Because I look at the situation, I look at Nina Turner, and there's a lot of reasons why she lost. I think these are all contributing factors, right? And she herself used to be honest, someone coming up from this point of view, and she saw Bernie Sanders' campaign, and that kind of was a shift for her, and for a lot of other people that was a shift. She saw an opportunity and she shifted towards it, and kind of went away from positions like, I believe she was like a charter school supporter, right?
Was a charter school. I heard about that.
Exactly, but she changed her positions, because, quite frankly, she conformed to what the movement was represented by Bernie Sanders.
We at This Is Revolution podcast is a phenomenon that we've talked about on our show. It's kind of a theme of my book, and it's a theme of our politics, is that there is a crisis in Black politics. We've had political scientists ranging from Preston Smith, Adolph Reed Jr., Cedric Johnson, and we've confronted them with this position, specifically Adolph, and he's like, "You're right. This is unprecedented, and you are probably one of the first people that really highlighted it, is that the fulcrum of Black electoral politics, for the first time in probably the history of Black politics, is in the right-wing faction of a political party with large numbers of white progressives to its left. Usually the black electoral politics is the more left-wing faction. Even with Jesse Jackson, when black people supported Jesse Jackson, they were more left. When does this start to change? With the rise of Bill Clinton. So the neoliberalization of black politics combined with the rise of Bernie Sanders creates a situation where now black electoral politics is defending the politics that is the most damaging to black constituencies, where you have white, Democratic, Socialist adjacent or left adjacent activists who are more left and progressive than the black voting coterie. That's a precedent, and that's a massive crisis.
When we talk about the black political class, I mean, me personally, I think you could say the same thing about like the Latin American political class. Chuck Rocha loves bragging about how he can deliver Latin votes. And what's interesting to me is like the rhetoric that you hear from the Democratic Party, because it's a lot of dark faces in high places, and black capitalism as some sort of racial uplift. And Pascal and I were talking about this maybe it was last week. Will Smith and Jay-Z. Have you seen this, Mike?
Will Smith and Jay-Z. I missed this one, but
like $165 million into a tech startup that's supposed to put colored folks in homes, right? In the article, it describes the program, and this is a pro-program article. It describes the program as supposed to help people that can't get into houses. They're going to buy a bunch of single-family residences. So they're not buying like low-income housing. They're buying single-family residences. These people are going to rent them on a 2-year contract. And if you can't qualify after 2 years, well, then kick rocks, it goes to somebody else. So if one of the big issues that we have with why people can't qualify for homes in the first place is income, because wages are stagnant, right?
That's income and capital,
There's been this war on labor for, as Pascal said, 50 years. These clowns are buying up single family residences. So taking these homes off the market, you got to compete now against
bidding up the prices.
Yeah. and they can buy in bulk.
Yeah. So this doesn't surprise me at all. This is the neoliberal program.
And people are loving it. Because of the look. Now, I haven't seen too many politicians sign on it, but this is no different than what BlackRock did.
It's exactly the same.
Government help.
It's pretty much exactly the same. I'm sure they have access to capital that's at near zero interest as well. So their ability to take that 160 million and turn it into billions to buy property, I'm sure is just the same as BlackRock. This is kind of the ridiculousness of American policy and politics right now, which is like, we know how to solve these issues. We know how to solve a housing crisis. It's very simple. And a 5-year-old will tell you the answer, which is they take their Lincoln Logs out and they would build more houses. You make more houses available.
We have more empty houses here in California than we do homeless people. I actually worked in one of the emergency shelters here in East Oakland.
Well, yeah, that's that. There's that too, right? Which is
buying
there's a large
hotels was actually kind of smart. You already have a facility that's built to code. It's a single room occupancy with a bathroom. Win-win.
Yeah, and there's kind of a bankruptcy in the advocates for like the solutions that actually work. This will, if they go forward with this, well, this will definitely make them a lot of money. It's not going to make a dent in the amount of people of color that own their own home, because as you rightly pointed out, it's a capital thing.
Rent to own thing. And here's where it gets even funnier to me. You get a credit counselor that's supposed to get your credit up, as if like that's the only obstacle.
I've had good credit and I've had bad credit in my life. I had good credit when I had good income. I had bad credit when I had bad income.
You're not sitting around with 30 grand in your pocket going, like 30 grand is not 20% down on a home in California. Maybe in the outskirts somewhere, maybe. But 30 grand down. That's all you got. Sorry, homie.
Yeah. Well,
And who's just sitting around with $30,000? If the majority of Americans work at Walmart and
$400.
Amazon, who the fuck has money to buy a house?
Yeah, I mean that's the opportunity that leftist politicians have. Start delivering housing that's high quality, public housing, social housing, and then they will get a constituency of people that want to vote for you. If you bring your own fatback and biscuits, to the working class, then they're going to be loyal to you. If we build up a labor movement, if we build up a community, activation with actual outcomes and results, then people are going to be loyal to that. And you have to show them.
Instead. Steak and potatoes.
Steak and potatoes. Yeah. Steak and potatoes.
You know the story of Chavez Ravine? Are you a sports fan?
I am, but you're going to have to explain this one to me.
So where the Dodgers play, Chavez Ravine was historically Latin neighborhood.
Okay, yeah.
And years ago, way before when the Dodgers were still in Brooklyn, it was kind of a ramshackle neighborhood. No running water, open sewer trenches. People just built houses wherever, but it was still a bit of a community. There was a plan during the New Deal to build, or right before the New Deal, to build a whole bunch of public housing in that area. Schools, parks, the whole nine.
Sounds like sewer socialism.
So they go up to these people that live in this area and say, look, we're going to build this house and we're going to give you some money for your place. It may not be enough for you to go move into these white areas that still have racial covenants. We're still talking about redlining, and that definitely affects the Latin population as well, especially in California. So you've displaced thousands, and the pushback against the public housing project comes from the LA Times and the real estate lobby that said public housing was a communist venture.
I mean, that's, of course.
Great public housing is a communist venture. Pushback against it never gets built. So now you have all these people gone. A few stay, and then they get bulldozed for the Dodger Stadium. Also, the owner of the Dodgers was behind pushing back on the communist housing bill as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I sometimes talk to my community about, is where leftists were successful in stuff like the housing policies, right? Like, for example, in Vienna today, the average rent for a place is $400 a month. And that goes all the way back to the 30s with a movement, when they had Red Vienna there, and they had, socialists and social democrats built 80,000 apartments in a year. Okay. Mm-hmm. They redeveloped that whole area, and it wasn't until the Anschluss that they lost power. Or, I mentioned sewer socialism, but that's famously in America, in Milwaukee, the place where the socialist movement was the strongest. And they had 3 straight socialist mayors, and they had the first socialist congressman. They did that by literally building sewers in Milwaukee, public parks, public housing, pools, recreation, schools. And they were widely considered the best mayors in the country. The same thing with Bernie Sanders in Burlington, right? When he came into office, what did he do? Push back against every single neoliberal project. He built public parks. All the largest employers are co-op employee, owned. The largest landlord is a tenant-owned organization. So you have to actually show people an alternative that is better than, black billionaires buying up houses to rent to people.
But that's what people... You have to aspire to be that, right?
Yeah,
that's capitalism for you.
No, it's okay. Well, guys, I don't know, how much more time do you have? We started a little bit late and we went a little bit longer than the hour. Do you guys have anything else you would like to talk about, or any projects you want to plug?
We have a show. We do a live stream here on Twitch as well, every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific. I stay in California time, 6 p.m. Pacific time, and Saturday 9 a.m. Pacific time. I've been up since 3 a.m. Pacific time, editing a video. I do these video intros, and also we do a video essay series for Zero Books called The Dispatch. So I've been making these like 5-minute introductions to get people ready for what the show topic is going to be about. And this Tuesday, we'll be talking with Dr. Nicole Alexander Floyd about the revolutionary capacity of the Black church. And I was up all day making the music for it. The show comes out of me being a heavy metal punk rock musician that's toured all over. And
all right.
And kind of wanting to talk about politics, and also this is the only way I can still do music is by making these clips. So it's a pretty interesting clip. Pascal, I have to run it by Pascal first, and if he likes it, then I feel very comfortable to put it up. So Pascal gave me the thumbs up, so I send it to you in the chat, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'll definitely plan on checking out that video after we're done. But yeah, no, well, thank you. And is there anything, Pascal, that you would like to plug? I'm having my mods are putting all the information out to the audience.
Immediately, I'm still working on my book project, Crisis, the Crisis of Black Politics, Fracture from Obama to Trump and the Crisis of Black Politics.
Pre-orders, maybe?
It's not out yet.
Okay.
I'm working on it. That we'll be discussing many of the issues that we just talked about on your program in terms of how class politics in Black politics works to disadvantage the majority of working class Black folk.
All right. Well, thank you both for coming on. Sorry for the technical difficulties last week and screwing up the beginning of this, but I really enjoyed the conversation. Hope to see you guys more on Twitch, and I'll make sure if I'm around to try to throw you guys some. We're gonna start.
People. I forgot to say we're gonna start doing more stuff on Twitch. I'm taking a break from this online world that we all live in for the next couple of weeks. When I come back at the beginning of September, we're going to be doing, I think it's once a week. We're going to be doing something Wednesday on Twitch. It'll be a little more fun. I'm also a big fan of like science fiction and horror movies and toys. So it'll be, but always from a left perspective. We can never just totally fall off into the pop culture deep end.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thanks guys for coming on, and I really appreciate it.
No problem.
See y'all soon.
Peace.
All right, chat. That was the This Is Revolution podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know it's not the Afghanistan Taliban winning stuff that we were all watching before they popped up. We do politics here every morning starting at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. You can watch us here on Twitch. We're the morning guy, the morning politics guy. Politics Frogs in every single day, same time, 10 a.m., day in, day out. And we carry you through your morning and early afternoon politics needs. And if you need more, Mike from PA, we have a YouTube channel. We talked about suburbs, the My Pillow guy, Ted Cruz. We talked about DSA. Amazing. Making fun of Tim Pool. Amazing. Look at all of these amazing videos. Get in there, watch them. We have me on Twitter. You got to follow me on Twitter, chat. I'm at 20,614 subs. That means I got like 40 followers on Twitter in the last day. You can do better than that. You can do better than that. Go follow us on Twitter. And of course, join the Discord, where we have an incredible community of left-wing streamers. We have left-wing community. We talk about the stream. We talk about politics. There's gaming content. It's a really awesome, supportive place. Direct action, mutual aid, and you can just let off some steam. And also, you can help produce the show. One of the things I do is I look at the links that are put into the news content suggestions chat room on the Discord. Join the Discord, come hang out, and maybe what you want me to talk about will be part of the next show.